This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jonathan Blake, and in the early hours of Friday the 17th of August, these are our main stories. Tributes have been paid to the singer Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, who's died at the age of 76. Hundreds of newspapers across the US have launched a coordinated defence of press freedom following Donald Trump's comments on the media. And an international research team has produced a map of the wheat genome, which it says will help to develop new varieties to cope with climate change. Also in this podcast,
when you sort of sum the number of people that are meeting online and the number of people that go on to get married or have long partnerships online, it's a huge, huge difference in the quality and length of relationships that's being driven by meeting on the internet.
Did you know that your chances of long-lasting marriage could be higher if you met your partner online? In 2008, when Rolling Stone magazine drew up its list of the 100 greatest singers of all time, it put Aretha Franklin at the top, ahead of Elvis Presley and Marvin Gaye. You know a force from heaven, you know something that God made, and Aretha is a gift from God, said Rolling Stone. Today, her family described her death from pancreatic cancer at the age of 76 as one of the darkest moments of our lives. But they know her legacy will live on. Aretha Franklin's success wasn't instant. Her voice didn't fit into the Motown 60s pop sound. However, when her gospel roots were mixed with rhythm and blues, Aretha's soaring voice made her the Queen of Soul. From then, she set the benchmark for what a female singer could achieve. Our arts correspondent Vincent Dowd looks back at her life.
Aretha Franklin was part of the soundtrack to an era of big social change in America. People loved her superb gospel-influenced singing.
What you want, baby, I got. What you need.
She was born in Memphis and raised in Detroit. Her father, a well-known Baptist preacher. Her parents split up and she was raised by her grandmother. Aretha still sang in her father's church, though, and in her mid-teens recorded an album of gospel favourites. Much later, the singer said church-going had always been part of her life.
It certainly served as a testing ground for me as a singer, as well as many other good things came from the church. To come home and to be in church is just a feeling that I really can't describe to you, but you get it nowhere else.
By 19, she had a recording contract, but real success came after moving to work for Jerry Wexler at Atlantic. For many fans, she was now the female singer, soulful but with a bluesy edge. From the earliest years, her voice could be raw and powerful. This is her in 1968. But when she wanted to be, the Queen of Soul could be versatile too. She borrowed a Dionne Warwick chart hit and made it her own.
The moment I wake up, before I put on my makeup, I say a little prayer for you.
There were fans who thought Aretha should stick to hardcore soul, but she made no apologies for enjoying a Burt Bacharach pop tune.
That was a song that I loved, and I wished I had have gotten it first, but since I didn't, so what? I sung it anyway.
By the late 70s, the hits were fewer and there were family problems to contend with too. Yet in 1993, she sang at Bill Clinton's inauguration concert in Washington.
I had a dream of days gone by when hopes were high and life worth living.
16 years later, she would also sing for Barack Obama's inauguration. Chart success had diminished, but fans retained a huge love for her early work.
I'm no longer doubtful.
The golden years were from the mid-60s, but her voice excelled for decades, from jazz music and show tunes to soul. At her best, Aretha Franklin was one of American music's great vocal stylists.
You make me feel like a natural woman.
Our arts correspondent Vincent Dowd on the life and career of Aretha Franklin. She has died at her home in Detroit in Michigan, surrounded by her relatives who said that they had lost the matriarch and rock of their family. Stevie Wonder was one of the last people to visit Aretha Franklin. Michigan once declared that her voice was one of the state's natural resources. These people in Detroit have been paying tribute.
Everybody here in Detroit is going to miss her very much. She's so special to us. She grew up here. Her father grew up here. She's a special queen. It's a hard day.
To see someone so special like that and as powerful as she's around the world feel this. And like I'm feeling. And like I said, she's just a queen. It's not much more to say.
Mourners gathered at the church where Aretha Franklin's father preached. Our correspondent Aline McBool spent the day there.
I'm outside the New Bethel Baptist Church, which is where once people were drawn to it because they heard of this incredible young singer, this little girl with this powerful once-in-a-lifetime voice. And then they were drawn here when Aretha Franklin was a star because she'd come and sing here free. She'd give everyone food as well. But over the last week, people have been drawn to this church because of vigils, hearing that she was in a serious condition. And now they come to lay tributes. Many have been driving past, playing Aretha and talking about how much she means to them. She had been ill for many years, but it was not something that she wanted to talk about. But she'd cancelled so many concerts because of ill health. She lost so much weight, people knew that there was something wrong. But when she did perform, right until the end, she absolutely gave her all. But it was more than just about the music industry that Aretha Franklin had an impact. And we've spoken to people who lived in these very streets who say during the civil rights movement, she was the kind of voice that could make you do that, could make you forget about that. And she was heavily linked with the civil rights movement. Her father was a good friend of Martin Luther King. And so it's clear from all of the people that we've spoken to that this was a woman who not only changed the music industry, but in doing what she did, in becoming a successful black woman in the 1960s, she also changed the face of this country as a whole.
Aline McBool reporting from Detroit, Michigan. Well, politicians, celebrities and musicians have also joined ordinary Americans in paying tribute to the so-called Queen of Soul, as Richard Hamilton reports.
President Trump was among the political figures who expressed their condolences to the family of Aretha Franklin.
She's brought joy to millions of lives, and her extraordinary legacy will thrive and inspire many generations to come. She was given a great gift from God, her voice, and she used it well. People loved Aretha. She's a special woman, so I just want to pass on my warmest, best wishes and sympathies to her family.
She sang at the inaugurations of 3 US presidents, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. In a joint statement, Bill and Hillary Clinton said the soul singer was elegant, graceful and utterly uncompromising in her artistry. In her voice we could feel our history, wrote Barack Obama, all of it and in every shade, our power and our pain, our darkness and our light. And on the streets of New York, these people spoke of their gratitude towards the Queen of Soul.
Back in the 80s when I was in high school, there was a song, Another Night Without You by Aretha Franklin, which I used to get over heartbreak. And I would pass the cassette over to my girlfriends who were also having some heartbreak problems.
Someone like her, she transcends the genre. I mean, yes, she was the Queen of Soul, no doubt, but she transcends soul. I mean, it's available for everybody.
It's just timeless, you know. We see a lot of things in this world were like that, you know, where we could all unite and vibe and something like that, and I think it's very powerful.
The civil rights activist, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, gave this tribute. A lot of music left the earth today, he said. The heavens rejoice. Among the panoply of famous singers paying their respects was Diana Ross, who said she was sitting in prayer for the wonderful golden spirit, Aretha Franklin. And Bette Midler, who tweeted, "The greatest voice in American popular music has been stilled. She was a musical lighthouse, guiding and inspiring with every note." Beyond America, the British pop star Elton John described her loss as a blow to everybody who loved real music from the heart, the soul and the church. Among the many vocalists influenced by Aretha Franklin are the duo Sister Sledge, who told the BBC's Simon McCoy about their favourite Aretha song.
R-E-S-P-C-T. Find out what it means to me. You better think about what you're trying to do to me.
Oh, don't stop. Keep going. As tributes go, this doesn't get much better.
We do want to take just this opportunity to send our deepest condolences
to the
family, and we're sending our love. And immediately when we heard this sad news, we just had to stop and pray and just lift up the family.
We've lost something very special.
Yes, we have.
The Queen of Soul, but she will always be with us.
One of the more unusual tributes came from the American space agency NASA, which said that an asteroid, 249516 Aretha, found by its Neowise mission back in 2010 and named after the singer, would continue in its orbit beyond Mars.
Richard Hamilton, and that name, you heard many of those paying tribute to Aretha Franklin, used the Queen of Soul, was given to her during her first flush of fame, but it endured over the course of her decades-long career. She recorded her first gospel album in 1956, aged 14, and was signed by Columbia Records in 1960. But it wasn't until 1967, after joining Atlantic, that she was ready to find her own voice. That came with a single, I've Never Loved a Man the Way I Loved You, recorded at the Muscle Shoals studio in Alabama. David Hood was a session musician at the recording. Julian Marshall asked him what was the unique sound that Aretha Franklin created on that day.
Well, it's a rougher, more R&B sound. What she had before was sound like somebody who's a lounge singer, where this was a rhythm and blues sound, or as it would come to be known, a soul sound.
As you heard Aretha Franklin singing, I Never Loved a Man, did you realise that you were listening to a hit?
Well, we didn't know. Nobody knew at first. Pretty soon, after not very long at all, we knew we had recorded a hit.
How was that?
Well, it's just a response from everyone who heard it. It was Atlantic's first hit record with the female vocalist. It was, I think, the response they got from the disc jockeys and the people in the business was just tremendous.
Was Aretha Franklin very confident on that day?
Well, she's a shy lady. She sat by very quiet and shy. She was there with her husband, Ted White, who was her manager. She was quiet, but she meant business, I guess you could say, when she started playing and singing.
This was 1960s Alabama, and here you were recording a black singer.
Yes.
Was that problematic?
No, not at all. We had been doing things like that quite a bit, even though it's a white-owned studio and a white producer and mostly white musicians. We had worked quite a bit with different black artists, Etta James for one, but also Wilson Pickett and several other artists, so it was not uncommon at all. For us, the African-American people felt very comfortable working with us because they knew that we were on their side, so to speak, and our goal, everyone's goal, was to make a hit record.
And do you believe that it was that recording on that day that turned Aretha Franklin into a superstar?
Yes, I certainly do. That day, she only did that one song and then started another song, Do Right Woman. And the session ended. There were some problems between Aretha's husband and one of the musicians who was making fresh remarks toward Aretha, and he took offense to that. And the session ended after that, and they left and continued recording in New York to finish the album.
You must have played with a lot of singers in your time. How do you rate Aretha Franklin?
At the top. Absolutely at the top. I've worked with Etta James, Mavis Staples, Aretha, All these people are great singers, but I'd say that Aretha was number one.
And why is that?
I don't know. It's a God-given talent.
Session musician David Hood speaking to Julian Marshall about recording I Never Loved a Man the Way I Loved You with Aretha Franklin back in 1967. Still to come in the podcast.
He ordered a part, he said, from the US. He waited 3 years, but it never arrived. In the end, he asked a friend to bring it over from America.
Palestinians have received 8 years' worth of letters and parcels that have been held up by Israel. In a coordinated move, hundreds of newspapers in the United States have used their editorial columns to blast President Trump for his attacks on the mainstream media. The president's views on critical journalists are well known. He regularly accuses them of fake news. He's even described US journalists as the enemies of the people. Here's a snippet of recent comments made by Mr. Trump.
But they can make anything bad because they are the fake, disgusting news.
But what message does coordinating the nation's editorial columns against the president send? Rebecca Kesby asked Alex Kingsbury, who sits on the editorial board of the Boston Globe, which is organising the action, why they decided this was necessary.
It was that phrase, the enemy of the people, that we found particularly alarming. We are not the enemy of the people. We are journalists and we are Americans. And it's deeply alarming that the president would label journalists as such in a functioning democracy. And it's one thing for major news organizations like the Boston Globe with considerable resources. It's another thing for the vast majority of newspapers in this country that are very small organizations run by a dozen people or less in small communities where this sort of rhetoric can have, potentially dangerous consequences. The press is central to a self-governing democracy, and we think that's an important message to reiterate. It shouldn't be controversial or newsworthy that journalists are standing up for the First Amendment, but here we are.
Well, lots of journalists around the world might be listening who operate in far more difficult circumstances than you do in the United States. The US has some of the toughest laws on freedom of the press in the world. They might just say, why don't you just get on with it and exercise those rights on a daily basis?
Which is exactly what we're doing. But the idea that the capitals of Ankara and Moscow and Beijing are seeing an American president label journalists as a domestic enemy is exactly the sort of precedent that we find deeply alarming.
Briefly, Alex, what do you hope you've achieved today?
We hope we've raised awareness with the American people. We might not reach Mr. Trump, but we hope our friends and neighbors take note of the importance of the work that we do.
Well, as part of the campaign, many newspapers are taking their own individual stands, as I heard from our Washington correspondent, Chris Buckler.
I think what must be noted is that they're all putting it into their own words. We have a range of different newspapers, more than 300, all putting together editorials in which they are defending journalism, and they do it in different ways. In the New York Times, they quoted President Thomas Jefferson. They don't mention President Trump, but others are being much more explicit. For example, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch says that Trump is inflicting massive and perhaps irreparable damage to democracy with these attacks. But there are also newspapers contained in these number that have put these editorials out today that actually supported President Trump in his campaign to become president. For example, the Topeka Capital Journal. It says, "We are not separate from the public. We are the public. We live and work and play in Topeka and surrounding areas. We go to restaurants and send our children to school. We drive the same roads. We're not the enemy of the people. We are the people." So you get a real sense of different voices, but all uniting to say that they are concerned about the rhetoric that is being used by the president.
Will it make any difference to President Trump's support base?
I don't think it will make any difference whatsoever, and certainly I don't think it's going to make a difference to President Trump. He has already tweeted today that the fake news media is the opposition party. It is very bad for our great country, but we are winning. At the same time, when you take a look at the polls, and there have been some surveys done specifically about Republicans, it seems like half of all Republicans, 51% suggested one recent poll, 51% of Republicans see journalists now as the enemy of the people. This is a phrase that has particularly upset by Donald Trump, the one he has used a lot and which has caused a lot of chance to be used against journalists, for example, at rallies that he's held. Now, that idea of journalists being the enemy of the people, that is something that is shocking to a number of people. And it's not just those working in the media. The Senate today in the US has passed a resolution to make clear that journalists are not the enemy of the people. But of course, that gives you an indication as well that Donald Trump is using these phrases as a campaigning tool. And I suspect he will continue to use them.
Chris Buckler in Washington. Wheat is the most widely grown crop on Earth. It provides more protein than meat in the human diet and gives us about a fifth of the calories we consume. But faced with the impact of climate change, new strains are urgently needed. With that in mind, scientists have succeeded in working out the complete genetic code of wheat and have just published their findings. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh has been taking a look.
Traditional methods for creating new varieties are expensive and painstaking. They involve cross-breeding species over several generations, and even then, getting the desired traits is down to chance. It can take up to 15 years before a successful new strain makes it onto a farmer's field. Researchers have now identified more than 100,000 genes and their position on the DNA of wheat. They have in effect produced a map which shows and labels all the most important places on the wheat genome. The new map is expected to cut the development time of new wheat varieties by half, according to Professor Cristobal Uai of the John Innes Centre in Norwich.
Without having the map of the wheat genome, it's been very difficult to achieve the increase in demands that we're getting around the world. But now with the wheat genome, all of a sudden, we can actually use all the genetic information and genomic information to accelerate the breeding process and produce better varieties more quickly, and that can feed the world towards the future.
The new map will help researchers identify the genes associated with traits such as drought tolerance, yield and nutrition. This will help them to develop new varieties of wheat much more quickly that will be needed as the planet's climate changes.
The BBC science correspondent Palab Ghosh. On Wednesday, Mena Jobran, a woman living in Cairo, posted a video on social media of a man who'd been following her. Her intention was to highlight the sexual harassment women regularly suffer in a city ranked last year as the most dangerous in the world for women. But as well as some support, she's also faced a backlash, as I've been hearing from Alma Hassoun, our Arabic Women's Affairs reporter.
The woman, she's I think, fresh graduate, and she's a painter. She wrote on Facebook saying that this man has been following me and chasing me. After a few hours, he himself filmed himself responding. And he said, "Hey guys, what happened? Why over 500,000 people have viewed this clip?" I just saw a woman standing on her own in the street, and I thought that rather than standing there among all of these people, why doesn't she have coffee with me? Did I do something wrong? Did I invite her to my car? Did I invite her to my house? It was just a casual comment telling her, let's have coffee. And he said, I can't understand why you have done all of this fuzz.
And why have people criticised the woman for posting this video? And what have people said about it?
First of all, many people, really, we need to say this, many people said she's brave. And many people start sharing their own experience with harassment, in a way that reminds of me too. Many people said you have dared to do things that we don't dare to, although many women say that they face harassment on a daily basis. However, many people, men and women, have criticized her. They said, you are after fame. What he has done wasn't that massive. The woman herself did film another man last year doing the same thing, harassing her. So that's why people were saying, are you trying to do this, trapping men and filming them? However, she said yesterday in the TV interview I watched, she was saying, it is an issue. It is a thing that harassment is regular. I face this regularly. Even when I go to do sport, even when I try to run, people harass me. And she said sometimes she used her back and she threatened the man in front of her that she's going to hit him if he approached her.
BBC Arabic's Women's Affairs reporter Alma Hassoun. Palestinian postal workers are sorting through a mountain of mail that Israel has finally delivered to the occupied West Bank. Some of it dates back years. 10 tons of parcels and letters have been building up in neighbouring Jordan for almost a decade. Our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman sent this report from the West Bank.
Well, I'm standing in pretty searing heat in a depot in the middle of Jericho. and looking at hundreds of mail bags that are piled up. There are bags I can see from China, from Saudi Arabia and from Turkey. The workers here are saying it's going to take at least 2 weeks for them to sort through all this and get it delivered to the addresses in the West Bank and Gaza that it needs to go. And inside some of these mail bags, the condition of some of this stuff is pretty terrible. There's a bundle of letters just here, a letter that's been sent from Greece, another one to somebody in the city of Hebron in the West Bank, and some of the letters are broken up and creased and there's mould on some of them. A wheelchair in front of me here was destined for somebody in Gaza, but the label has fallen off, so they don't know exactly who it was supposed to go to. One of the oldest items they've got behind the bags here is a high-definition TV. It was actually sent 6 years ago in 2012 and still hasn't got to the person who bought it.
The customer now, he knows everything because of the internet and the social media. Every customer have its own tracking number.
Ramadan Ghazawi runs the Jericho sorting office.
They check for it by internet. They ask us. We apologize for them. That's not our... we are not the reason why we didn't receive it. We are going to do the best as we can to deliver those in a very short time. It's better to come later than not to come at ever.
Better late than never.
Yeah.
The consignment of mail had been held in neighbouring Jordan before the Israelis allowed it in. Israel controls the borders of the occupied West Bank. A decade ago, it agreed more autonomy for Palestinian postal services. It involved some international mail being flown into Jordan and transferred into the Palestinian territories. But the deal and subsequent agreements appeared to falter, creating a huge postal backlog. Many Palestinians say mail from abroad simply never shows up. In a shop off Jericho's main square, I met Fadi, who fixes air conditioning units. He ordered a part, he said, from the US. He waited 3 years, but it never arrived. In the end, he asked a friend to bring it over from America. Israel described this week's 10-ton consignment as a confidence-building measure, saying it has gone beyond the letter of the law, adding that the postal agreement with the Palestinian Authority is in the final stages of being worked through. The deal seems to be taking as long to deliver as many of the mail bags themselves, in a part of the world where even the post is political.
That report from the West Bank by Tom Bateman. Internet dating used to be something that you might not admit to doing without cringing just a little bit, but that stigma has long gone and it's now a market worth $5 billion. In fact, 1/3 of couples in America say their relationship began online. Hal Hodson is a technology correspondent with The Economist and he's been taking a closer look at the online dating market. He told Vivian Nunes that couples who meet online actually stay together longer.
It's not by much, it's not a huge amount, but when you sort of sum the number of people that are meeting online and the number of people that go on to get married or have long partnerships online, it's a huge, huge difference in the quality and length of relationships that's being driven by meeting on the internet.
Another thing you found is that diversity has been on the rise. So we're seeing more couples now of different races, thanks to online dating.
Yeah, this is very early research and it's not sort of ironclad yet, but it's very interesting. The reason for this is that normally when we meet people offline, we tend to meet friends of friends or friends through family or people basically that are already in our social groups. And our social groups are incredibly racially homogenous, especially in the West. And what online dating does is just let you bypass that social group entirely. So instead of friends of friends, you're just meeting sort of total strangers who might be, you know, within whatever radius you happen to set on one of the apps or whoever you happen to find on one of the sort of more long-form dating sites.
Online dating has really liberated dating in more conservative markets like China, for instance.
Yeah, this came out from our reporting in Beijing and talking to the CEO of Tantan, which is one of the biggest apps there. His name is Yu Wang, and he started this app called Tantan a couple of years ago, and it already has 20 million people using it. And what he said is that Chinese people have never really had a culture of dating. The idea that you would ask someone out is sort of obscene and not something that people do. But when it's online, somehow it's okay. And, you know, Tantan is the sort of proof in the pudding, if you like.
And it does sound as though online dating has also revolutionised dating in the West in the sense that it used to be very much stigmatised in the beginning, but now it's become totally normal to meet people online.
It has become totally normal. And you know the way when you start thinking about a thing, you start to see it everywhere. So I started to see people using online dating apps everywhere I went, on the bus, on the tube, people talking to their friends about matches, showing pictures of, people they thought were attractive, just everywhere. And while dating used to be kind of constrained to the bar or, the social gathering with your friends, it now goes with you everywhere. It's in your pocket, it's in your bedroom, it's in your living room, it's on public transport with you. And so you can sort of always be dating, which is both worrying and, I guess, good.
The online dating market has changed drastically in the past decade. Where do you see it going next? Well,
the dating platforms are starting to use a lot more clever software to try and create better matches. So this doesn't mean that sort of an individual is paired with an individual using, I say, artificial intelligence or just clever software. It means that the list of people that you see have been tailored for you. So rather like Amazon presents you with, a list of items you might like, the dating app platforms are starting to present you with a list of people you might like. And this, again, is both good and bad. If it helps people find better matches faster, that's probably good. But it's worrying because instead of dating happening, in thousands of pubs all over London, it now happens on about 3 apps. And that means that for the first time, really, in human history, there's the idea that you might be able to control or influence some aspects of who meets who and who couples up with who. And this is very, we don't really know much about this. We don't know how it's working, but we do know that the dating companies are not particularly transparent with the data that they collect and how they monitor people. And so this is kind of a new concern in the same way that we worry about what Facebook knows about us and what Google knows about us. This is, dating and romance and intimacy is some of the most important stuff in human life. And we need to start worrying about what these companies know about us and how they use it.
Hal Hodson, technology correspondent with The Economist. Let's end this edition of the Global News podcast by returning to our main story, the death of the soul singer Aretha Franklin, who was aged 76. Known as the Queen of Soul, she performed for the last time in November 2017 for the Elton John AIDS Foundation Gala. When she announced her retirement from performing, she said she felt bittersweet. On reflection, adding her career had left her very enriched and pretty satisfied. So how will Aretha Franklin be remembered? Colin Patterson is our entertainment correspondent.
I really do not think it is overemphasizing things to describe her as the most influential vocalist in female singers post-war. This is a singer who set the blueprint on how to build on her gospel beginnings, and she really began to take what she'd seen in church into the charts. When you heard Aretha Franklin sing, what you heard was someone combining the sacred and the secular. This is a voice full of heartbreak, inner strength, songs about joy. And when you look at the hits that she had in 1967 and 1968, the first 2 years she was signed to Atlantic Records. Respect, You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, Think, I Say a Little Prayer, Chain of Fools, 8 million sellers in 1-2 year period. Simply, without Aretha Franklin, you would not have had the likes of Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Mary J. Blige, Lauryn Hill, Christina Aguilera, those singers who used that gospel sound and took it into the pop charts. Very interesting to see Adele paying tribute today, one of the biggest female singing star at the moment. She says, I can't remember a day of my life without Aretha Franklin's voice and music filling up my heart with so much joy and sadness. Absolutely heartbroken she's gone. What a woman. Thank you for everything, the melodies and the movements.
Our entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson on the legacy of the late soul legend Aretha Franklin. And there is a special programme available online. Mark Cole talking to musicians, fans and producers from different parts of the world about what made Aretha Franklin so special. That's Aretha at 75. You can listen to that now at bbcworldservice.com. And that's all from us for now, but there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you want to comment on the podcast or the topics that we cover in it, you can, of course, send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Jonathan Blake. Until next time, goodbye.